Perfect. So first, if you guys don't mind, if you could go around, say your name, the year you graduated from BGSU, and where you are at now.
Do you have a particular order? Or okay, go ahead, Alex.
We should just go. Yeah, I'll go first, and then Melissa, and I guess Katie. All right. So as long as I remember the questions, I'm Alex Chanel. I graduated from Bowling Green in 2017. I'm currently working up in the Toledo area with Beer Group Architecture Engineering. Did I hit all those questions, Haley? I missed some.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Okay.
All right, I'm Melissa Garrison. I graduated, I think in 2008. I can't actually remember for sure. But anyway, I think it was 2008. So long ago. And I work with Current Architecture in Indianapolis.
Awesome. And then Katie, if you're still with us. All right. Yeah, so we can just keep moving on, and then when Katie's connection, there's like the little orange triangle on her screen, she can hop back on into the discussion when she gets there. But I know for my grade, at least, we were juniors. Katie was our graduate assistant our first year, so a lot of us are pretty familiar with Katie.
I'm going to close out.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. All right. Is being an architect or working in a firm anything that you expected when you were in school?
I would say I think it's what I expected when I was in school, but there's definitely a lot of things that I wasn't necessarily prepared for. I think when it comes to the business side of the firm and the practice and project management, I wasn't expecting any of that or how that would go. I didn't really know how to run a job, obviously, coming into working in a firm. So that's something I definitely learned. But that'd be the biggest thing that I would say I didn't, wasn't what I quite thought was going to be what it was.
Yeah, I would say there's a lot of things that are, sorry, trying to formulate my thoughts. There's a lot of things that are different, especially just as Alex said, learning about how a job moves through the process from start to finish is quite a bit different. That's not something that you really discuss when you're in school. At least I never did, undergrad or graduate school for that matter. I think the school teaches you how to critically think through like problem solving, and I think that's a big part of your daily job. So there's some of that overlap that's similar to what you do in school, what you did in school. But yeah, there's a lot of things that an architect needs to do on a daily basis that you just really don't get into in school, and you really only get that through internship and job experience. But anyway, yeah.
Awesome. And then Katie, if you're there, I'm not sure if you heard the question, but is being an architect or working in a firm anything that you expected when you were at BGSU?
It's a lot more. I caught the last of Melissa's. It is different. It's a lot more paperwork and a lot more screen emails than you ever would have thought. I mean, even at the low level, like I'm not a project manager yet, but even then, I still have emails that I have to answer every day. Writing. I think I'm on my 24th AIA document of the day for subcontractors. Just a lot more paperwork, a lot less drawing than you ever would think. But at the same time, like that's all so important and part of it. You all have to get paid. So.
Awesome. Thank you guys. When graduating from school, did you think it was difficult to obtain your first job? And if so, would you have any tips for students looking?
Personally, I didn't think think it was very difficult, but that's also because I was set up well with the internships that I had beforehand. I was lucky enough to intern with Beer Group when I was at Bowling Green, and I continued working there remotely when I was in grad school, and they offered me a position. So I didn't think it was necessarily that difficult to get a job, but I did apply elsewhere, and especially in the Cincinnati area, because I went to school at Miami, so I was really familiar with the people around there. So I did go through the process of preparing a portfolio and updating resume and everything. And I'll say that, going to a job fair specifically for architecture, where there's another 100 students there trying to get the same positions as you, the biggest thing you can do is to create a portfolio and a resume that'll make you stand out. It's not necessarily even about quality of work. It's just how you present yourself and market yourself. So the biggest thing I would say to do is really focus on how you can market yourself better, leaving school, whether you're going, straight from undergrad to a firm or if you're coming out of grad school. School doesn't really teach you how to do that. Some places might. Personally, I didn't feel Bowling Green necessarily did, but if you can do that and market yourself well, it's going to put you a step ahead of the other people that you might be competing with.
Yeah, I graduated during a pretty good time for the economy, so I didn't notice it being too difficult to find a job either. So that wasn't really a struggle. I think Alex said the way you present yourself, and I think for me, thinking more of like the interview process, the presentation, the way you present yourself in an interview, I think is vitally important. I think even little things like being friendly, smiling, making eye contact. I think things like that go a long way. Confidence, I think, and sometimes it's a little, especially if it's your first interview, your first job, it can be a little difficult to have confidence. But if you can project an air of confidence without being, you don't want to lean too heavy toward being arrogant, because that also is a turnoff for employers. But if you can project some confidence, even if you're not really sure what it is that what you're doing. Not that any of you would necessarily not know what you're doing, but I think it can be a big help in the interview process. Asking questions, they always tell you to ask questions about the company that you're interviewing with. Do some research beforehand. That all is kind of true, because companies like to see that you are engaged in what they do, and their process and the types of projects that they do. So they're in a lot of ways, and they say this too, it's kind of a typical thing that you hear, but you're interviewing them as well, and they want to know that you're interested in working for them. So a lot of the key tips that you hear are kind of important. Yeah. So
Awesome.
Your internships are the best thing that most of those firms, when they hire you on, they do have in mind whether or not they want to hire you back. And more often than not, if they liked you, they will, because you're already trained. You already know how they want their sheets set up, how they have their files organized. And that doesn't seem like a lot at first, but switching from place to place, that takes time to relearn. That's huge for a firm, to have someone already trained and ready to go. They can teach you so many other things, but you're productive from the get-go. That's huge. Treat your internships like gold. I mean, show up on time. Ask questions when you have questions. Don't take off, 3 weeks in the middle of summer, as much fun as that would be. But really use those. If you don't like where you intern, go somewhere else. Keep that experience in mind. Like, if you work somewhere at like a really big firm and you decided that is not how you want to go, make sure that you look for places that are going to make you happy. And if you're a happy employee, you're going to work better, and your employer is going to know that. They'll appreciate that.
Awesome. I think those are all super great tips. I think that's definitely a fear that a lot of us have leaving the school world. It's kind of a nice little cushion for us, and internships are a little bit different than careers, but we definitely appreciate that advice. Do you feel that architecture education transfers into practice well? And if not, what do you believe should change?
So I think the design aspect that you taught, I'm going to focus specifically on Bowling Green, because that's obviously what you guys are experiencing too. But I felt the problem solving and the practicality of the education you're receiving and the way they're teaching design transfer really well. Um, it's easy, I feel like, for some people who come from very art centric programs, they learn how mostly to design, and that doesn't transfer. They have a big gap there between what they're actually doing in their internship and then what they're doing in school. But at Bowling Green, I felt that it provided me a good basis to start from. Now, obviously, there's no way for school to teach you everything you know, and a lot of that you just learn from experience in your internships. But I don't think necessarily anything should change. I remember having this discussion at a grassroots conference for AIAS, and I think it's more of a school by school basis. They need to approach it differently. But what is going on at Bowling Green, I felt transferred really well and set me up well to learn from the people I'm working with.
Yeah, I would agree with what Alex said. I think BG transferred pretty well. I think Ball State Graduate School, I think the same thing. There was a lot of very useful information, problem solving, critical thinking. Those are things that are invaluable that you are going to use in your career daily. I think the one thing, and I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, I think, in the first question, but the one thing that I see lacking a little bit is just kind of the understanding of how a project runs, how a firm runs. You really don't get that in school. And I actually, hopefully I wouldn't have any Ball State professors listening to this, but I had a class at Ball State that was supposed to teach some of that. And we really did not do that at all. The discussion was actually completely different than anything related to working in a job, at a job. So it's a little hard to make that stuff stick though when you're in school. It's difficult. Like, you really learn it from on the job experience. So I wonder, I mean, that could be why they don't really get in deep to teaching things like that. But I think some background in that would help. You would start out knowing some of that. Like, I didn't know there's all kinds of state review processes, city review processes, at least in the state of Indiana, that and I think Ohio is a little different as far as that goes. But I didn't even know what that was when I started at my job after graduate school. So there's just some things like that. It would be kind of nice to understand what different governing bodies there are, who you need to answer to as an architect beyond just the client, or engineers, or your boss at the firm you work for. I think some of that, having more of a background on that, would help you at least know. You may not know all the details of how that process works, but you would at least understand that process does occur and that it is in place, and that's something you have to learn, essentially. And starting out, I didn't even know that was a thing. So there's some holes like that, essentially.
I agree. I think, well, some of the areas I wish they would focus on a little less, which is going to sound bad, but the design is, I mean, obviously incredibly important to your piece of architecture and your portfolio and everything else. But I don't think they emphasized on how fast the design process tends to be in the real world and how it's not up to you so much as your client. So I remember talking to professors, and they would be like, well, push or pull this, and they would try to steer you. And and this is probably a fault for me more than anything, I remember fighting them and doing what they said to a certain extent, but wanting it to be my design. And if you think of your professor as your client, that will get you a lot farther, because you can say, well, I want to keep this integrity. And In some jobs, that is great. That'll go well. But in other jobs, if your client says, I don't like it, you're stuck. You kind of have to change it. So I wish they would focus on how fast that process goes. How you don't have, like if your semester is what's considered an entire life of a project, you don't have half the time to just focus on design. That period needs to go fast and you need to come up with some solid answers right away and present them well and keep those intact. But then move on to the construction document phase faster because in the real world, that takes up a lot more time.
Awesome. Yeah, I think one of the things, at least personally for me, that I really enjoy about BG is that we do have a few professors that have practiced or are still practicing. So I think they always bring in at least a little bit of that knowledge into our design studios. But it's definitely interesting to see your guys' perspective on this topic. Do you feel that, what profession would you choose if you were not able to be an architect?
So I would totally go a different direction, and not because it's anything against architecture, but I totally would have been like a nuclear engineer. I don't know why. Nuclear technology just, it is super interesting to me, either that or like something to do with astrophysics and space design, the stuff like that.
Wow, that's quite a bit different. Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. I was looking at the list of the questions before you guys sent or before we started when you sent them over, Will. But it's kind of funny because when you're in school, everything is architecture, obviously. Like for me, like blinders on, that's everything. Like you can ask my husband because we were actually married for a little bit of time when I was in school, and everything was about architecture. And then when you get out, for the first couple of years, you're focused on taking your exams or your career, and so everything is architecture. But then over time, for me, I can only speak for myself, obviously, I've developed interests outside of architecture. I never thought I would. I thought architecture would always be everything. So I find that some of those interests, I almost at times would have liked to pursue those. And I won't go into details about what those are exactly, but they don't, neither of the interests I'm thinking of, they don't lend themselves to a career path really. So it's not something that you can actually necessarily take off and do. So I guess that's kind of going roundabout the answer. But I think the one profession that I thought of that I would do, at least back when I was in school, and I think I would still have an interest in it today, is graphic design. I think it translates obviously to architecture from a design perspective, and I always thought that I would enjoy that. So besides these other things that are completely unrelated and outside of architecture and are more passions of mine, I think graphic design is the career that I would have pursued otherwise.
I actually had to ask myself this question going through the accreditation process. Well, no, so our entire class panicked for a while there, but yeah, got it. But I graphic design for marketing was where I was going to head with that.
Okay. I'm not sure if Katie can still hear me. Hopefully she can. So when she hops back on, it'll be more fluid. But if not, no big deal. Kind of on this line, I think one of the things that I like that Melissa brought up was like when you're in school, architecture is like your world, But I think there are times where students kind of stray away from the path of architecture while they are in schooling. But sometimes it's too late to kind of change your major. What career paths do you feel students could look into if they got to the point where they were no longer interested in architecture, but were at a point where they're essentially like finishing up their degree or kind of figuring out next steps?
I'm gonna have to go second because I missed the whole question because my computer was buffering. So if Melissa can go, and I'll try to go off of whatever her answer is and figure out what the question was.
Yeah, I think actually my computer did something weird too, but I think you were asking for somebody, I think I got most of it, for somebody that is finishing up with architecture school, but thinking that maybe they wanted to go a different direction. Like, what is something that could translate easily? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I mean, I think anything in the construction industry, for the most part, and I say that, and I actually, as I say that, and then I think about it a little bit. When you're in architecture school, everything is depending on what school you go to, but things are so design based. When you get out, you get more of the real world. You get the construction side of things. So when I say, so I guess I'm taking back my answer a little bit, but I think when I was actually in graduate school, actually before I went to graduate school, I considered doing, I had my undergrad from BG, thinking about going back to school and thinking about doing structural engineering, because there's a relationship there. My dad is a structural engineer, and I grew up watching him, and he's actually also an architect. But I grew up, because he had that architectural side of things, I grew up watching him actually design, sort of, in a way, from a structural engineering standpoint, because it's not just all beams or columns that you hide. Like, sometimes you can obviously use your structure to really emphasize a space. So it's still design related, and it's still looking at the building as a whole and understanding space, spatial quality, massing of a building. So there's some relationship there. It's obviously, you guys probably kind of realize that structural engineering is pretty math heavy, obviously, and pretty technical. So there are obviously some big differences between that and architecture, but I think structural engineering can relate, can be an easy transfer. Actually, in my graduate school, I had I went to school with a guy whose undergrad was in structural engineering, and then he was going back to get his master's of architecture. So you can see there that, like, there's a relationship, and that can kind of translate a little bit depending on what you're looking for. Obviously, if you don't like math, you don't want to do structural engineering probably, but anyway.
All right, got disconnected. What was the question?
Yes. The question was, what career fields do you see aligning with architecture the most, for students that are kind of in the architecture path now, but maybe not see themselves going into that after graduation?
Well, I think that depends on where you're not fitting into the field the way you want. If you are more of a math, yes, I agree. Go into the structural engineering, general, great. If that is way too much critical thinking for you, now in no way am I dissing interior design, because okay. I know we used to joke about that a lot in school, but our interior designer here is absolutely amazing. She does a fantastic job. And in most firms, you do more than just pick out colors. You do have input on design. Granted, it's the function of the space and the furniture you pick, but that is, I think, more of what you tend to focus on, the fun aspect of designing, especially earlier in school. Figuring out where columns go isn't fun for everyone. So if the critical thinking or even what math we do is too much, look into design.
So I'm going to kind of go way out on this one and actually say one thing. I never thought about switching out of architecture necessarily, but I know a lot of people that when I was at Miami who were undergrad, they actually went into video game design, which is kind of a weird thing to think about. But they have to design these environments that are in these games, and you have to know how to design a building, kind of. I mean, obviously, you don't even know how to put a building together, but you have to aesthetically, you get to design a virtual world. So that was actually a really big thing. There were like probably close to 15 kids that went in careers after architecture school that were related to video game design. Now it's a total learning curve. You're coding, you're not necessarily using something like Revit. But it's the same type of situation. And if you enjoy designing and you enjoy designing buildings, that might be a career path that you could pursue.
Awesome. Those were all great answers. I definitely remember for maybe one class being interested in structural engineering, and then I went through the whole semester and did not like it. I could totally see myself going on the interior design path at some point, potentially. And I think video game design or like the virtual world design would be sweet, but I have never played a video game in my entire life. So I am not the average 21-year-old. I don't have video game systems, but I know a lot of people that would be so into that.
Haley, we took a class with video games.
We did, yeah. We had a writing class. This was the worst experience of my entire life, I think, because I just have not been into that thing. But we had to take a writing class, and we had to play video games, like computer ones, and then write about them, which was interesting. At first it was a lot of fun, but then the game just got repetitive and kind of dumb. But
That was the whole class where you played video games and then wrote about them?
Yeah, literally, that was it.
Wow. That actually sounds kind of fun. But I like video games, so I'm kind of a nerd.
At first, I was super optimistic about the class. And then I got like a third of the way through this game. And I think I was just more frustrated that my homework was playing a game. And I felt like I was like wasting my time when I could have been doing like studio work or something rather than playing this video game. And it takes hours. Like, and it wasn't like a short game. It was like weeks and weeks and weeks of playing this game. It was a lot, but I forgot that I did that. I think one thing that is emphasized a lot in Architecture Education Day through like AIAS, NOMAS, across the board, and CarbNab is studio culture, or the learning and teaching culture policy, which is kind of the new coin term for it, where you emphasize like student health and students and faculty relationships in like kind of the studio environment. And then with that, I've always felt that BGSU has a great culture in terms of its community. What would you say the culture was like when you were at BGSU, and how do you think that culture translates into like a work setting?
I think because of the size, I graduated in a class, well, of 13 kids. We started out with like 100 and stuff, and that's what we whittled down to. But I think because of the size of the class, it translated well to then my experience within a firm, because I work for a firm of about 15 architects, and then a bunch of engineers on top of that. So the size of it coordinated well. Now, and then when I went to grad school, it was similar. I was with 13 other kids, or individuals, not kids. So I had a unique experience where it did coordinate well. And I think when it comes to studio culture, there's a little bit of a disconnect between the professional world and studio. But I think overall, working in the studio and then, growing to become friends and almost competitors with some of your classmates helped me become a better coworker. I think when I started in my internship, I was very quiet, kept myself, just did what I was told. But the more and more I got comfortable in studio culture, the more that translated to me being comfortable in seeing my firm culture as a studio culture.
Haley, could you repeat the question one more time? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so today a lot of the student-oriented organizations, as well as like education-oriented organizations, focus on what's called studio culture, which is essentially the kind of the connections within the studio environment and faculty relationships, and then like kind of the health and time management involved in studio. So a lot of times you see students pulling all-nighters, which all of the organizations have come out and said that they are like not for that these days. But in addition to that, I think the community at BGSU has always been super strong. How would you feel like studio culture and like the way you practice in school and in conjunction with the community of BGSU at the time translated into your practice?
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear you say that, because when I was at BG, it was all about pulling all-nighters. Like,
Still
you actually, and maybe you guys have heard this, and Alex and Katie, you probably maybe experienced it at that time or when you went through, but it was like, if you weren't pulling all-nighters, it was kind of like not good.
Yes.
At least I shouldn't say all the time, like it wasn't expected all the time, but before a big presentation, like, yeah, you were kind of supposed to pull all-nighters. And I personally was not very good at that at all. I don't do well on not a lot of sleep. So it's really interesting. It's actually really good to hear that, because I think it is obviously unhealthy. I mean, I drank so many energy drinks, so much coffee. I mean, that I think, yeah, it was just really unhealthy. But anyway, so I'm actually really excited to hear that they're a little more conscious of that than they maybe used to be. And of course, it's, a different time, but yeah, I think the thing that it did teach me, though, by being that committed to my projects, is simply work ethic. You have to be kind of careful, because generally speaking, now I don't work. It depends on the week, but I don't work a ton of hours. But I will often work over, and I've got this like sense of, I don't know the right word, diligence, work ethic toward a project that I maybe wouldn't have generated on my own if I wasn't pushed in studio to work so hard, to be so committed to a project. And so I don't know if that answer really makes a lot of sense, but yeah, I think it really creates, a sense of work ethic, of care maybe for your projects. That carries you through your entire life. I've seen that same driving factor in other parts of my life and other things that I love and passionate about, or that I experience. Like, there's just a commitment to what I'm doing, which I think is really good. Obviously, I wish I didn't have to have so many sleepless nights trying to get there. But anyway, I think that's maybe kind of how it translated for me.
Awesome.
For me personally, my studio environment for undergrad was childish. Most of my teammates spent more time goofing off in studio than doing anything productive, and that was beyond frustrating. And I spent as little time in studio as possible. But my grad school studio, don't get me wrong, we had plenty of fun. There was times where there was no productivity. But to be able to sit there and focus as a team and as individuals, there was time for work and then there was time for play. That is definitely more relatable to work for me at my firm. We have lots of fun. We have Nerf gun wars here. But that's not the majority of the day. We focus and we get things done. So as far as studio environment, if your studio environment is more like my undergrad year, don't worry, get past that. All the childish people will be gone, and there will be fun in your career and in your firm. But studio environment, I think, has definitely changed, and it's been fun to watch it change at BG. I think part of that was getting the new building and having respect for our space. But it's been fun watching BG as a whole become more professional.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear all of your perspectives and where you were at when you were at BGSU. While there are statements against all-nighters, I do think the majority of the building still practices that. I could name a handful of people that have dog beds under their desks for sleeping arrangements these days. And I think behind mine and Morta's desk, at least, and Bailey, who's also in this call, we have a 12-cup coffee cup, and we probably brew it like 4 times a day at this rate. So yeah, and then I'm really interested to see with studio being online and not being in studio all the time, how that's going to affect the traditional studio culture of being in the building all the time. I personally always am. I love it there. That's where I spend all of my day. Even if I have nothing to do, I just hang out there anyways, which is weird, but it's fine. But it's interesting to hear where you guys were at with BGSU for sure. I think one question, at least that I have, that I'm sure a lot of like rising seniors and rising juniors is graduate school. So a lot of people are researching graduate school, getting ready to apply, getting portfolios together. What were some of the driving factors that led you to pick the graduate schools you did? So it was Miami, Ball State, and BGSU for graduate school.
I mean, I'm gonna just be very cutthroat about it, and for me, it came down to the money. And I'm not trying to promote anywhere, but I was trying to choose between three very, very good schools that I liked all of them for different reasons. And it just came down to financially, it would have been very irresponsible of me to go to the other two.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I'll leave it there. That's why I picked it, because like I said, it's not like I didn't like one. I would never have gone to a school that I didn't like. And I would say when it comes down to picking a school, make sure it's something that you feel at home at. Don't pick. I highly recommend against picking a school purely for prestige. So if, let's just use the name Harvard, right? You get into Harvard, that's awesome. Congrats, go to Harvard, but only if you like it. Don't go somewhere purely because of prestige, because you might not end up being comfortable there. And if you have any inclination of it just not feeling like home or not feeling right, I wouldn't do it. It's not like undergrad. You are much more invested mentally and time-wise, I think, in grad school and emotionally. So you got to make sure it's the right place. And sometimes it does mean financially taking on more. And if that's the case, then that's the case. But for me personally, it came down to picking between three great schools and picking the one that made the most financial sense.
Yeah, Alex, you make actually a really interesting point, because when I started looking for graduate schools, I didn't want to go anywhere in Ohio because it was Ohio. Nothing against Ohio, the actual schools. It was they have great schools, obviously architecture schools, but I wanted to leave Ohio to go to school, and so I chose Indiana. Like, that makes perfect sense, right? Right next door. So Ball State was actually not my first pick. I applied to a couple different ones. My top pick was University of Washington in Seattle, and I didn't get in there, so that was kind of unfortunate. That was where I had been committed to going. So what it kind of came down to, when I didn't get in there, a couple of the other schools, it actually came down to the cost as well, cost of tuition, and Ball State was one of the cheapest. But I say that, and looking back, I sort of wish that I had stayed. I mean, I like my life where it is right now, and I'm here in Indianapolis because I went to Ball State, and I'm okay with that now. But based on, I was out of state tuition at Ball State for I think for both years. So the cost of going to Ball State versus having stayed in Ohio and gone to an Ohio school is tremendous. You don't do fantastic as an architect. I mean, you make a living, but it's not a ton of money. So I would encourage, the cost of tuition to be a factor. Like Alex said, choose a school that you like, that you feel comfortable at, or that you feel has a good reputation. But I would encourage people not to be super totally completely in debt tuition wise, because it sucks. Maybe sharing too much there, but it's a long process to dig yourself out of that, especially when you just go to the next state over. So it maybe would have been worth it for University of Washington. And I don't mean to sound pessimistic. I'm really happy in Indianapolis. I've created a really good life here. We're really happy here. My husband has a good job, and I love my job. But sometimes I wish that I had stayed and gone to an in-state school in Ohio. So anyway, I didn't mean that to come off quite as pessimistic and negative as it sounded. So hopefully that wasn't a completely horrible answer. But anyway, I'll be quiet now and let Katie talk.
Very good. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was, what were the driving factors in picking the graduate school that you did?
Oh yeah, definitely about tuition. I think I've told quite a few of you this in the past, but school for me personally, hated it the entire time. Couldn't wait to be done. I started with an associate's, thought I'd be done after that, and then bachelor's. And then when I ended up deciding to stay in Toledo after my bachelor's, I was like, fine, I'm here. I'll go to school and I'll get my master's and I'll just be done. Which is definitely not the way to go about school. That being said, I'm very glad about my decision to go to school. I've watched so many people struggle once they graduate and they took time off and go back to school, and it was the right decision for me to go to BG. But wherever you apply, remember the name only matters for so long. Education itself does. So if you love the program and you know that it's going to teach you a lot and it's going to help you, that would be the main focus. I wouldn't care so much about the label of the school. That helps you only so far. The education and then how much it costs. Because, you know, like everyone said, you get out of school and you're finally making money and you're feeling real good, and then those student loans come in and you're like, oh, okay, I'm still poor. Good. You know? So focus on the education first, with financials a very, very close. Don't label a school just because you know it has a prominent name.
Yeah, I think those are all great tips. I do think we all suffer from the prestige list a little bit, including myself. Melissa, I also suffer from the I need to leave Ohio syndrome. I live 25 minutes away from Miami University and the University of Cincinnati, and neither of them are on my list at the moment. So, yeah, but I think that's really good to hear that. Kind of like regardless of prestige or name, like I think most of us kind of end up in a similar spot, and I think just kind of from what I understand, work ethic in the firm is almost more important than where you're at in your education and what school you went to, which is always good to hear. Definitely opens up options for everyone and makes probably people feel less inclined to pick a school that's more expensive just because of the name that it obtains. I do have one more question that's relevant to what is going on in the world today. It's kind of a 2-ish, 3-ish parter. One, how is your firm adapting to the coronavirus COVID-19 culture? And then 2, I think in the architecture and construction industry, one of the big fears is kind of job security. Typically when there is a recession, our fields kind of get wiped out pretty quickly. Have any of you guys experienced like the recession or any past recessions like the one in 08? And how would you recommend students finding a firm that is capable of surviving times like this?
All right. So we actually switched. We didn't even really have the capability to completely remotely work when all this happened. We could handle about 10 people on our VPN at once, but our internet at the office wasn't fast enough for more than that. Even then, we were struggling to, we can work in CAD, nevertheless Revit, or if you were doing rendering or anything. So it kind of was a wake up call for us, and we quickly upgraded pretty much everything in our office, and now we have the capability that everyone can remotely work. But the whole time, you were allowed to go in the office if you want, up to 10 people, because that was what the state allowed. So as long as you're 6 feet away, which all our desks were, so there were plenty of people who still went in, for the most part, because of just being safe. Most of us stayed home and worked. So we've adapted that way, and I think it's going to become a huge shift in not only our firm, but in how a lot of firms operate, and that this now opened up the door, the capability to remotely work, and it showed that a lot of meetings don't have to be done in person. A lot of things don't necessarily have to be done in an office. You can communicate just as well through Microsoft Teams or a teleconference like this. So I expect a lot more people to work from home from here on out, and offices to get smaller, I would say, in terms of size, because you don't need the space. When it comes to their session, I was in like 7th and 8th grade when the last one hit, so no, I didn't work through it. But as of right now, I would say I'm not really concerned about it. Maybe that's me being naive and not, I don't know. I feel that our firm, based on what I know and what the projects we work on, that I'm not really concerned that anyone's going to get laid off or it's going to hit us bad, because we've set ourselves up well with the jobs that we worked on in the past. Plus, we're working on now, that these jobs aren't going to just go away. Now, that's not to say people might stop spending and stop trying to make capital improvements in the next year, and that could hurt us. But we're in a unique position where if 2007, 2008 happen again, we're probably not going to take a big hit as for people working there, or even just on the projects that we have, just because it's the kind of work we work on. What was the third part of the question?
Do you have any tips for students looking for firms that are capable of having job security even through a more rough time?
Honestly, I don't. I would say no matter what, when you come in as the low guy in the totem pole, you're probably the first to go as well. So if it gets to that situation, there's only so much you can do. I've only worked in the medium to small size firm my whole life, and I feel this is purely just subjective because that's where I worked. But talking with my friends who work in all kinds of scales of firms, whether it be huge 200-person firms that are, or ones that are across the whole country versus ones smaller than me, I feel like I feel more safe based on the size of my company, because there's a more personal level, and I'm lucky to work for people who really care about their employees and want to make sure they stay employed, and they're going to do what they can to make that happen. Whereas sometimes with really, really big firms, like I said, low guy on totem pole, maybe one of the partners doesn't even know who you are, you're going to get chopped. Or even if when you're in a really, really small firm, just to survive, they're going to have to get rid of who they can.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe that's just my view, but I feel that kind of medium-sized companies would, in my opinion, be what I would go for if I was looking for a job.
Yeah, so as far as adapting to COVID-19, we were in a good position, I feel like, to adapt to that naturally. The owner of our company is adamant that we all work from laptops. We don't have desktops in our office. And the reason for that is the ability to work remotely. So we have a fair amount of flexibility at Curran, more so than I hear some other, at least larger firms do. I'm similar, I think, to Alex. There's 12, 13 people in our firm, and that's about the size of firm that I've worked for pretty much my entire architectural career. So some of my feelings about things like that are going to be similar to his as well. But so yeah, we were pretty well adapted to that. We have the flexibility to work from home occasionally if we need to. And so it's been a pretty, for me, from my point of view anyway, talk to other people in my firm, they may feel differently, but it's been an easy transition. And we go into the office if needed. I don't have a printer here, so I go into the office and print if needed. But yeah, it's been an easy transition. As far as the 2008 recession, I was actually in between undergrad and graduate at that time. So I was working for a company, JDI. Yes. You guys know of them? Yeah. They're engineers and architects. I was working for them at that time. And I was kind of an intern, but it wasn't an internship, but I was that level. And so I worked, I think they put me down to part-time. I think I was working Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And then I actually helped out with some administrative things in the meantime when there wasn't, CAD work or whatever I was doing available. So that worked out well. As far as, so what was the part of the second part of the question? Sorry.
No, it's okay. Just just if you have tips for students when looking for a firm that is able to provide more job security than another.
Yeah, so I agree a lot with what Alex said there. Again, a lot of my experience, JDI was a little bit bigger firm, but as far as the architectural department, it was probably, yeah, 10 to 12 people. But so most of my experience, except for JDI, has been with smaller firms, unless you consider JDI a smaller firm because the architecture department wasn't that big. But I think smaller firms tend to feel, small to medium, tend to feel like a family. People, they just, I mean, Alex said it really well. You have a relationship with the owner. They also, I can speak to our firm in particular. There's kind of, I don't know how to say it. There's a consideration for each individual in the firm. And I know my boss anyway cares about that is important to him. So he's going to try to make the best decisions he can. I think there's a little bit more of an awareness about being careful for hard times in a smaller firm. I know, or I should say small to medium. I know there is a reputation that a lot of the bigger, more prestigious firms out here in Indianapolis have, that they hire people. They'll hire 10 to 15 people for a project, hire them, keep them around for the 6 months to a year that project lasts, and then let them all go. And there are definitely a couple of firms that have that reputation, and that is just not something that would happen at Curran. Sean, my boss, would never, that's just not how he works. And you don't always know that going into an interview. You can't tell. But I do agree. And again, I'm kind of biased too, sort of, as Alex said. I think a small to medium firm, I think you've got more of that security. I just think it is kind of, that comes with the territory of that size of firm. Yeah.
I am also at a small firm, probably one of the small I know of. 10 people max, including our office and our figurehead, who's not. We were laptop based. We are ready to go. You can tell with my connection that that's been a little iffy at times. It's depending on who's got a meeting when. And we're all remoting back and forth in Microsoft Teams. You can sit there and you're working and then you have a question and you can text your boss real fast and be ready to go. So communication hasn't been hurt for us. I wasn't here for 2008. That's beyond me, but I do know how the firm handled that. And when they were hit hard, gave their employees the option, we can start laying people off, or we can all take a pay cut temporarily, get through these times, and then make up for it later. Which few people had to choose to leave, because I mean everybody's situation at home is different, and you can't base them off that. But for the most part, everybody stayed, and they took that pay cut, and it was hard for however long that period lasted. But majority of those people are still here now. That has made this environment so much stronger. And then going into this potential crisis for our career, they had that knowledge and how to be ready to go. So they were confident in what to do, and they had already come up with enough of a backup plan and saving us rolling forward, which has been great. This is our first day back in the office. You can see we all have to wear masks, but we were all given the option to stay home and continue to work from home until you feel safe. But I think most of us came back bored, and we just wanted it together. So, which is why I don't think I could have spent another. As far as advice for looking for a firm, there are advantages to big and small firms. I personally always loved a small firm. It feels like family. I can't imagine. But are concerned about how a small firm will do in times like this, and you look for bigger firms. There are benefits to being in a big firm. The government helps step in a little more, not necessarily for this particular thing, but the FMLA Act says that you have to leave and go take care of family for whatever reason. That you have a firm of more than people, that you will be able to get that time. Not like, hey, it comes out of your vacation first. So I think that wouldn't help you so much in this situation, but in general. But big firms do have their positives as well. Not enough, I think. I think being in a family is better. Each their own.
All right, Katie, I think we may have lost you for potentially the remainder of the call since it is 1 p.m. If you guys are at like a time crunch and need to hop off, please feel free. But if you have like maybe one last comment for BGSU students, BGSU architecture students in particular, that you would like to leave us with before the end of the call, it would be greatly appreciated.
I guess the thing that I personally felt is the biggest message or that we talked about to kind of convey is again that idea of prestige with your grad school. And I think when I was at Bowling Green, there was a big push from a couple professors to go to specific schools, and those are all great schools. And I would totally recommend everybody you apply those if that's something you feel you can attain. But when it comes to those rankings that we all look at online, I remember I think U.S. News was who posted them or whatever when I was in school, and keep in mind how those rankings are put together, and that typically it's based on how many students come into the school and how many students leave the school, and that the education you're receiving at any accredited school is pretty much the same, minus some of the kind of content that you can get, and that's where you got to pick what you want to do. Your focus on sustainability versus something else versus historic preservation or whatever it is. But just realize that you're paying for the same education in the end, and don't set yourself up to be in a bad position in the future. And it's really hard to look at that 2 years before it happens. But when you get hit with that student loan bill 6 months after you're out of school, it kind of is a reality check for some people, and it kind of like what Melissa was saying. We make decent money, but we're not doctors. So it's going to take you time to pay that off, and that's going to affect what you can do in the rest of your life. So don't be careful on what kind of debt you're taking on before you do it, and do calculations and understand that before you take it on, because I personally know quite a few people who did not realize what they were taking on, and unfortunately are kind of stuck now.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that you can say about architecture. There's a lot when I was where you guys are that I didn't understand, that I obviously see now, but obviously that comes with experience. Just simply experience. Experience is a huge part of architecture. It's a huge part of life in general. But I will say, just something that comes to mind as a key piece of advice. I often want to encourage, I've got some nieces and nephews, and I often want to encourage them to do architecture because I love it. And I would love to have another architect in the family to talk with about whatever. And I mentioned that my dad is an architect. He's a structural engineer first. So he gets it, and then architect second. So he gets more of the structural engineer side of things. So I can talk with him, but I'd love to have like this little protege that I bring up behind me. But I find myself very hesitant to encourage them in that direction because I think architecture has to be something that you care about, that you really enjoy, that you're passionate about. You don't have to be passionate about all parts of it. There are parts that I do in my daily job that I don't enjoy. But for the most part, I find that I would say three things that I like the most. Design is definitely number one. I love design. I am in my element when I am designing, whatever it might be that I'm designing. I am surprised. I consider myself an introvert, but I am surprised that I actually enjoy the client relationship quite a bit. There's a big part as you progress in your architectural career. That's a huge part of what you do. And then I also find that I enjoy sometimes what's considered the more mundane parts of the career, which is doing the construction documents for the contractors to build off of, the detailing, the technical stuff. So there are at least three major components of architecture that I really enjoy. And there are days that I don't want to deal with a certain client, but for the most part, I enjoy all three parts of that. So if you really don't, you obviously don't get into the client relationship at school. But if you are finding that you don't really enjoy any part of it, I would say consider a different option. And I hate to say that, I don't want to be discouraging, but I mean, just like Alex just said, you don't do fantastic at architecture. You do okay, you make a living, but you're not going to make a ton of money. And it's a lot of hard work. Often there's a lot expected of you. So it's, again, I don't want to be discouraging, but I would consider a different path if you don't have some passion for it, because it's not an easy career if you don't really love it, essentially. Yeah.
Katie, we were just asking for any final thoughts or tips you may have for BGSU architecture students.
I agree with everything that's been said. Aren't absolutely in love with it right now. But that being said, there are some aspects that are going to change. So if it's the staying up all night and presenting to the crowd, those things aren't going to stay exactly the same. I mean, it's definitely not a 9-to-5 career. I mean, in some firms probably more than others, but love what you do, no matter what it is. I think my biggest advice: if you hate school and you can't wait to get out, go to grad school now. That has been hard to watch many of my friends struggle to come back. Some of them even loved school. They only took the time off to make money and build a resume. But watching them go back now and have to, no offense, but put up with all you like 22-year-olds, the maturity level isn't the same there, just because you're on different parts of life, and it's hard. And I am very lucky that I took the path that I did. But love what you do, no matter what it is. And if you don't love what you're doing right now, find something else, because you're not going to be rolling in money. So
Awesome. Well, seems to be a theme. If you don't love architecture, get out. But no, just kidding. Today, this past hour, I think, at least for myself and hopefully for our members who can watch the video later, has been super enlightening. You guys have given great advice, great answers, just kind of a good perspective to kind of see where the architecture profession is, its juxtaposition to education, just kind of little tiny things like that that we don't necessarily get to discuss on a day-to-day life with our professors who may not practice, or even with one another who obviously don't practice. We're all a bunch of students. So I personally definitely appreciate the time that you've taken with us in AIAS today. Warda, the NOMAS president, is on right now, so I'm sure she'll be sharing it with her members as well to make sure everyone in BGSU architecture can see what great things you are all doing now. But yeah, anything else or questions that you may have for us being students still?
I don't have anything.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything either. I'm still shocked to hear that they're kind of encouraging you to not pull all-nighters. That is new to me.
Yeah.
It wasn't even like that when I went through graduate school. It was a little different than Bowling Green. Bowling Green, it was like almost an expectation. All
Yes.
State didn't seem to push it that quite as much, but so that's not really a question. I don't think I have any questions. I will say I wanted to tell you guys real quick. I am just now kind of getting involved in any alumni, anything with Ball State or Bowling Green. But Sean and I, Haley, you may remember, Sean and I came to your guys's, your job fair, whenever it was, a couple months ago. And I have to say, I was pretty impressed with the students that BG, impressed and excited and proud of the students that BG was turning out. So that's a compliment to all of you guys that we met. So very cool. And yeah, that's probably all. I don't have any questions.
So much. That is so nice.
Good job to all of you.
Thank you so much. I think that's so good to hear. I feel like
Yeah.
since BGSU is kind of a smaller school that not necessarily everyone know about, I'm sure some people get discouraged sometimes. Like when I just feel like there's always kind of that comparison there of like, oh, you're at Bowling Green State versus like an OSU or Miami, who is kind of just a more well-known school in general because we are still young and considering. But it's good to hear that professionals are recognizing us. This past year, our master's degree finally passed its accreditation, so that has been super exciting across the board. So we love having alumni involved, and we're glad that people are recognizing the good things going on here.
Yeah, I guess I should add too, Sean, my boss, was also impressed. He is a Ball State graduate. He is the one that approached me about coming to the job fair. So it was his interest in you guys. And then he's like, hey, you should come along too. So yeah, he was the one that first thought about reaching out, which makes me sound kind of bad maybe, but he recognized you guys first. So yeah, I would not feel that you aren't, I try not to feel that way too much, but yeah, so hopefully, yeah, awareness will keep growing, but yeah. So good job to all of you guys. Compliments to you.
Katie, did you have any last thoughts for us?
I feel so bad for the class of 2020. Not the same as I had in mind. And that final review and being able to stand up and that has been torn away from you guys. So I'm sure many of you are pretty happy about that. But I feel so bad, and I hope you guys get something out of this, and that there's some sort of 2020 architecture class reunion in a year, so you guys can all there and celebrate one last time. That is a big moment. For me, I met you guys all as freshmen, and I was so excited to see your final reviews and see how much you guys have grown, because it just blows the mind watching you guys develop your designs and the way you think about things, and I'm sure you're feeling it. Sure, me saying that doesn't help, but I hope the best for all of you. I'm sure you're all going to have very colorful and fun careers, and I can't wait to catch up with all of you again.
Thanks, Katie. That is definitely sweet and to the heart for sure. Thankfully, Ward and I still have one more year. Hopefully it's in person, but thankfully we still have that option. If you guys do know any graduating architecture seniors or graduate students just across the nation. AIS National is doing a platform right now where they're celebrating students that are graduating, where they can send a picture and just a little bio of themselves, and they'll be featured on the national website with a little virtual graduate cap. It's actually super cute, and we plan on linking it on our personal website. So it'll be on nationals.ais.org and AISBGSU.com. We'll be featuring that as well. And then if you guys ever have questions or need updates, I would definitely recommend our website, which is AISBGSU.com, or you can just reach out to us at any time. But yeah, thank you all so much for the time. I'm sure you guys are busy and it's weird working from home, so I'm sure taking an hour out of your day is not necessarily helpful on the productive level. But we definitely appreciate the time that you guys took with us today.
Thanks for having me.
No problem.
Yeah, thank you guys.
I was only there for half of it with